Right, so welcome everyone to our weekly call. You should see that recording is now enabled. Give you a message on your respective devices. Now, the main topic of our call today is going to be the announcement from the NSA, the US agency, regarding its advice to enterprises on the use of encrypted DNS. So we'll cover that, and then we'll pick up on a few items of any other business. And particular welcome today to those of you from the US who are joined, despite the fact it's Martin Luther King Day today, if I can say that properly. For taking the time out, despite that, to join. Right, what I'm going to do, just to give us some context for the discussion, in case you haven't had an opportunity to read the announcement, is I'm going to just give you a whistle-stop run through of the key points in the NSA's guidance. So I'm hoping that you can see that the slide. Sorry, actually, I've shared the wrong thing. Apologies. Let me do that again. I meant to share the PDF, as it's a bit clearer than the PowerPoint. So let me just redo that. Right, so hopefully you should see on your screen the title of the report, which is Adopting Encrypted DNS in Enterprise Environments. Can someone just let me know that that is indeed viewable and legible on your screen?
Yeah, we can see it. Thanks, Andrew.
Yep, it is.
Thanks. You'll see also there's a link in there, and that's also in the weekly headlines email as well. You'll find that. In fact, if you look in the headlines email, you'll see, as I was just mentioning, a random cross-section of some of the stories in the press, just picking up on the report. This actually came out, I think it was in the latter part of last week. So what I've pulled out is, these are really just the headlines from the report, just to give you a sense of what's in there if you've not had an opportunity yet to read through it. So as you can see, it firstly just calls out some of the issues as the NSA team see them when using encrypted DNS. Although it talks about encrypted DNS, it mainly refers to DOE, but not exclusively in there. It does acknowledge that there can be some benefits in the use of DOE in environments where there aren't DNS-based security controls, which may include home and mobile users, for example. But then goes on to say, but there can be some downsides in the enterprise environment, particularly if there's an enterprise-operated DNS server or designated external resolver that the enterprise uses. It does suggest that ideally the enterprise should support encrypted DNS, but only locally, so between the clients and its designated resolver. But that and if it does so, that it should block access to any other encrypted DNS resolvers. And if it doesn't support DOE, then it should carry on as is and block access to all encrypted DNS resolvers until such time as it enables encrypted DNS support for its own resolver. It highlights a number of issues with the use of encrypted DNS, and again, I'm paraphrasing these. There's more detail in the report, although it's not a hugely detailed document. So it calls out 4 issues, which in order are: it may give a false sense of security, mainly because, as you all know, encrypted DNS is not sort of foolproof in terms of the protection that it guarantees, and certainly in the absence of encrypting SNI, it certainly doesn't guarantee that you can't see the content that the user is accessing anyway. It may bypass the enterprise's DNS monitoring and other DNS-based protections, as we know, and it certainly calls out some of the issues to do with split horizon DNS and exposing internal names externally, amongst other things. And sort of then goes on to sort of further highlight some of the exploits that the enterprise would still be vulnerable to, even with the implementation of encrypted DNS, such as things like DNS cache poisoning and so on. And then finally, in terms of how to mitigate those issues, as I said earlier, only use the enterprise's own sort of designated DNS resolver, and disable access and disable and block access to all others. And use other protections such as sort of device DNS logs and so on, firewalls, intrusion detection systems, etc. So don't just rely on encrypted DNS. Potentially consider a VPN as well, which I think most or many enterprises would do that as a matter of course. And don't overlook the need to, for example, use DNSSEC to validate the content of the DNS responses, which, as you'll know, isn't an intrinsic part of DOE or indeed of the other encrypted DNS options. And then, so the last point there on the bottom of that slide, if you do use an external resolver, this is a straight quote from the report, ensure that the chosen resolver has a reputation for security and reliability, which hopefully most enterprises would do that as a matter of course. Right, so that was a very quick whistle-stop tour of some of the key points in the report, which I'll leave you to read at your leisure. And I should say I have reached out to the NSA to see if they'd be prepared to allow someone to join a future call to discuss the report themselves. But in the meantime, I thought it might be useful to just have a discussion. I'm assuming it would be of particular interest to those of you that work for organizations that provide enterprise software and support enterprise customers, and indeed those of you that operate external resolvers. But anybody else is entirely welcome to have an opinion as well. So with that in mind, I'll open the floor. If, as always, you could, if possible, use Zoom's facility to raise your virtual hand, or put in the chat that you want to raise your hand. Or if you're in an environment where you can't talk readily, then feel free to put a question in the chat, and I'll come to that as well. And then we just sort of see what where the conversation takes us. But I can see already both Vinny and Chris have raised their virtual hand. So Vinny, do you want to jump in first?
Sure. Thank you. So some of the points that were made in that document, I definitely agree with. I raised some of similar or intersecting issues in my presentation. As I had noted, one problem that I see for enterprises to enforce the policies that the NSA is recommending becomes difficult in the cases where the enterprise is offering network services but are not managing the device. And that was a use case that I've raised a number of times that's very common. So, again, a guest network's a great example of that, and I don't think we've solved that problem. The DNS leakage issue is definitely a major concern for enterprises. So if you've configured your favorite browser to go to a DOS service and a resolution for a resource that is an enterprise resource is first tried over the DOS connection to an external server, then you've leaked that internal server name out to that external DNS service. An issue that I've actually raised privately with in terms of a feature request with OS vendors and a couple of the browser vendors is the notion of authenticated DOS, and this would allow enterprises to place their DOS servers externally facing, but then authenticate access to those DOS servers so that only their employees are accessing those DOS services. And I think that's another area that's worthy of exploration. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinny. All salient points, and certainly just touching up on one of those, it does make things like bring your own device rather more challenging. I think was your point about the unmanaged one. Okay, Chris, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. So I thought this was interesting when it popped into my email today. I mean, in some ways, it's not surprising because many clients already disable DOS if they detect they're in an enterprise network. Certainly, the Firefox implementation did that. I suppose it does make it clearer that yes, the use of DOS in an enterprise is an issue, particularly if it's tunneling to someone on the internet. What is surprising is that this is coming from the NSA, given that they were behind the surveillance that led to the original statements on passive monitoring as an attack, and that led in turn to the creation of DOH. So it's a lot of the motivation for the creation of it came from that, but then here is a statement that says actually encrypting DNS is good and that enterprises should deploy their own encrypted DNS servers. So I guess there are two main recipients of the message, isn't there? So there's the client operating systems and apps. To them, they're saying you need to know if you're running in an enterprise network, and if you are, you need to behave appropriately, which is defined here as only using the enterprise DNS. Whether that is encrypted, great, or not, still fall back to it. And the other message is to the enterprises to say, they're not saying stick to port 53, are they? They're saying you should look at deploying encrypted DNS. And of course, for them to do that, they need to know that the clients will be using it. So this means, yeah, there's even more reason why we need a DNS discovery protocol that works for this use case.
Yeah, that's very fair, Chris. Yeah, and a good observation in terms of maybe some of the history here as well. Okay, thank you. John, you got your hand up next. Do you want to come in?
Three sub comments. The first, I think, is that this document is I'm actually pleased to see that the NSA has come out with it. It's kind of an admission that, you know, this is the encryption barn doors are open and there's really not much you can do. So you might as well join them if you can't beat them. So providing a little bit of advice to corporations, and this is really targeted to corporate and I think small medium government users, that this is how you should implement. I think it's a decent document. And it's a good explanation of how all these different DNS threats might apply to them. So it's useful in that. The second is, I think that authorization in DOE is actually a very good idea, and I'd actually suggested that sometime in the past as well. I'm pleased to see that others are thinking about that, and that might actually then also open up some opportunities for the people providing commercial DNS services to be able to provide different profiles, obviously, to each user. So I think there's some follow-on that's really worth evaluating there for authorization in DOE, using probably existing methods for authorization that already exist in the protocol or in HTTP. And then the last is that while I think this document is very good in its explanations, unfortunately, the final message was kind of laughable, which was, oh, if you don't like DOE, you should just block DOE. Well, okay. They even reference a little comment. They said, there are commonly available lists of IP addresses of DOE servers on the internet. That's kind of preposterous to believe that you're going to block all DOE endpoints, because the ones that are the most malicious are the ones that are not going to be on those lists. And by nature of using port 443, you as an enterprise operator are probably not going to be able to block the worst offenders. You can block the big ones, the more commonly used external recursive resolvers, but there's an admission of failure deep in this document, which is that you probably can't do anything about the worst things that are going to happen as far as security and regulating your DNS, because it's not operating on a separate port, therefore you're not going to be able to block it. So those are my 3 points.
Yeah, well, those are fair points. Certainly more guidance on what tools you might use could be helpful to maybe bring that to life a bit. And of course, it can be complex. Depending on what IP address is being used, you might block a whole lot of other content right at the same time, which will be a challenge for the most corporates, which don't typically have the resources of China to throw at such activities. Okay, yeah, good comments, thank you. Jim, I think you're up next, if you want to jump
Thanks,
on.
Andrew. I just want to pick up on something that Chris mentioned a moment or two ago. It's probably unwise to look at the NSA or the other three-letter agencies and assume that they've got a single global view of any particular piece of crypto technology. Because these organizations are essentially split. You've got essentially defensive and an offensive capability, if you use those terms loosely. And in some cases, they'll be looking at issues like, for example, having strong crypto as being a good thing because it improves privacy, enhances security, even if on the other hand, it makes other parts of that organization's job more difficult because the crypto is stronger. You might remember, well, some of you may not, is that with the TLS 1.3 stuff was going on, one of the active participants in the TLS working group, and I think she's still there, is Deb Cooley, who works for the NSA. And as far as I know, her efforts there were all about strengthening TLS and in TLS and hardening the crypto in there. Now, maybe some people are going to say, well, you know, this is just part of an elaborate conspiracy plan, and this is all part of an NSA backdoor effort to install, you know, backdoors and all the rest of it. Maybe that is, maybe it's not. I don't know. But we should be careful not to assume that these organizations are entirely concerned about making their jobs easier, because in some cases it's in their interests or in the broader national interests that there's stronger crypto. I know, for example, that's one of the things that the UK's NCSE is concerned about when it comes to their public sector DNS resolver service, that they're trying to protect people from bad things, but the bad things are access to malware and all sorts of other stuff like that. Even if that probably doesn't make it easy for them to do all sorts of other interception. That's all.
Yeah, I think points well made, Jim. Yeah, we shouldn't assume that just because it's the NSA or whomever that their intent is bad. That'd be rather foolish, I think. So yeah, fair comments. I can see just on the chat, Vinny sort of made the point, or just repeat the point he made in his presentation of a few weeks back about the importance of having a mutual negotiation of DOE and indeed other encrypted DNS outcomes and the benefits of that, rather than clients or networks acting unilaterally. And certainly help here if that was done. Just also on the actually just reflecting on John's point on the less well-intended resolvers are unlikely to publish their IP addresses to facilitate blocking. I guess that probably underlines the importance of eventually having tools that help identify encrypted DNS sort of data streams within HTTPS, along the lines of the presentation from Luca from a few months back, for example. So I'd be interested to see if any such tools become more mature and are brought into things like enterprise software in the fullness of time. Yes, I see Greg has commented about if the NSA know how to block DOE, if they could just tell us, please. Or you can ask them that yourself, Greg, if they do accept my kind invitation to come on to one of our future calls. Just sort of scanning down and see Pat has also put a question in. Yeah, which is right, that in due course ECH will make blocking harder, and that Active Directories will potentially sort of enable man-in-the-middle attacks. So not attacks, man-in-the-middle and inspection, but that TLS 1.3 will end that. By all means, come off mute if you want to sort of comment further, Pat, but my sort of takeout on that is it's going to get ever more complicated and more difficult.
Could I ask a question on that? So I didn't quite grasp. Is it true that TLS 1.3 means you cannot have corporate HTTPS inspection? I didn't understand that that was the case, but I've not particularly looked into it.
Are you able to come off mute and comment on that?
I believe that is the case. That's what I've been led to believe, that effectively the servers which were previously configured to trust an intermediate host could inspect on a TLS 1.2 connection the inner requested domain and effectively block that so-called SNI, server name indication inspection. With TLS 1.3, that is actually encrypted. So if you were hoping to poke your nose in, as it were, as like a Fortinet box or some form of proxy like that, you're going to be unable to do that. That would
so I think ECH certainly does that, which is an optional extension to TLS 1.3. Yes.
Yeah. So the tools of which many enterprises rely upon, i.e., those sort of trusted Active Directory CA provisioned boxes, they won't be able to do that sort of level of inspection. So blocking will be very rudimentary.
Yes. You have to do it all or nothing. Yeah.
That's my interpretation.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Yeah, oh yeah, and
To be
Brian's
clear
just
to say that it's not by default, though. It has to be opted into.
Yeah. And of course, ECH isn't quite there yet, although you would have seen, I'm sure all of you, that some of the interoperability testing will be starting with the 09 draft any time now, which is intended to just be sort of frozen for a little while to give people a chance to catch up on their interoperability testing. So I think we're still a little way off with ECH becoming available, but it's certainly coming. So I think the point definitely stands that some of the existing tools will stop working in due course. Yeah, so it's going to get more complex, probably through this calendar year, in particular. Okay, any other thoughts or observations, particularly for anyone that, if you've had a chance to read the full document yourselves? Anything else you wanted to call out on it? Other than the point that I think Brian made just at the start of the call, that because it's got fairly widespread coverage, it might actually draw some attention into the topic more generally from the wider sort of media, because a lot of the stuff around encrypted DNS tends to be in, should we say, slightly more niche titles in the main. Always good to see Tony channeling Paul Vixie. Yeah, and it's a fair point that some of the threats that were identified in the NSA report do indeed also apply to home users and others, not just enterprise users, which is fair. I see. Sorry, Vinny, I just noticed you had your hand raised. Apologies. Do you want to come back in?
Yeah, others have mentioned this, but I just thought it was worth noting that the use cases described in that document are definitely something that fall into the work we're doing in ADD, right? So I think this really does need to get bubbled up as like a very clear use case that needs to be solved.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The other thing I should have said, by my take on the document was that, sort of making allowances for the subject matter, it was relatively untechnical in how it approached it, and it tried to sort of simplify it as far as is practical in a relatively short document. I don't know if that was others' impression, but I thought that was they certainly made a good go at making it relatively simple. Okay, any other thoughts anyone wants to bring out? See, Pat's posted a link to a browser in the chat. Arno was asked about what happens with DO proxies. Which Pat's just answered. So thank you, Pat, that was very timely. Okay, well, let's park that then. As I say, I have put in a request to the NSA to see if they would entertain the idea of someone joining a call to give their own take on the report. But if they bite on that, then I'll let you know. We'll always be interested to hear firsthand from the NSA if the opportunity is there. Right, I've got any other business. Is there anything that anyone else would like to just raise before I go on to that? Give you a chance to just jump in if you wish to. I'll take collective silence as not at the moment. All right, well, let me raise these things and then see if that prompts anything else. I've only got a couple of items. First one is, I think it's today that the IETF's early bird rate for IETF 110 closes. So if you were planning to register and were planning to pay rather than use a fee waiver, then if you don't do it today, then the rate goes up. I think it's $50 if I remember rightly. So do it by, I think it'd be 23.59 UTC today, and you'll save yourself or your company some money by doing so. And there was a reasonable number of registered attendees already, so looks like a decent number there. The other thing, just a bit of feedback, which you may have seen a note from Andrei Meshkov earlier today, that he was asked on the call last week when he was talking about the AdGuard DOQ software. He was asked by Vinny, by Ralph, I think, whether they'd be happy to use a different license agreement so that their software could be incorporated into commercial offerings, and he's responded to that today to indicate that they have changed the license for two of their offerings. So if you've not seen that, there's an email from Andre sent to the weekly call email list, so that should be in your inbox if that's of interest to you. But I have to say I was quite impressed how quickly he was able to respond to that, which I think is quite impressive. So hopefully that gives Ralph what you were hoping for in terms of a different license.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I was impressed as well, and it's very welcome.
Yeah. So that should make it more easy for others to use the AdGuard software in their own implementations. Okay. So those were my two items of any other business. Again, just quick check. Is there anything else that anyone else wanted to bring up this afternoon? Last call. Take silence as not. Oh, actually, sorry, there was one other thing. I do apologize, which was just a reminder that if you're planning to respond to the Mozilla TRR consultation, that closes this Wednesday, Wednesday the 20th. So if you are planning a response, you're hopefully well into the drafting of the response. If you need a link to the necessary consultation document, then just email me and I'll send that to you directly. But you've got till Wednesday to put your responses in on that if you've not got them in already. Okay, well, on that note, then let's call a halt to the call now, I think. So thanks everyone for coming on, and let's see if we get one of the guys from the NSA team to come on in the next few weeks. It'd be very interesting to get their take on it and to expand on the paper. So have a great week all, and speak to you again soon.
Thank you, Andrew.
Andrew.
Cheers.